The year was 2004, and I had two favorite things in the world: video games and spaghetti. My dad had recently, unbeknownst to me, made my wildest dreams come true and purchased the current generation console, the Microsoft Xbox. The only other console I had owned beforehand was the PlayStation, where I played a pretty weird set of titles. Monsters! I'd nearly dipped my toes in video games at that point, and with my obsession with Sonic the Hedgehog reaching excruciating heights, I was hungry to introduce myself to more video game giants. Would it be the green-suited FPS warrior, a red plumber that manipulates gravity, an orange marsupial with an obsession with the buttocks region? None of these would even come close to the platforming icon that I came across next: a square yellow sponge. I suppose the way I found this game really fits the unconventional nature of it. I found it in a Stop and Shop. You see, my local Stop and Shop used to have a video game section. It even had like a PS2 and a display that you could play. Except that it never worked. I'd always lounge in this area whenever my mom took my brother and I shopping, whetting my ever-increasing appetite for video games. Video games. But then one day in 2004, I came across the legend himself. I looked at that back cover and saw pictures of SpongeBob's swollen tongue and Patrick's inflatable belly and realized that this was the game for me. I had one problem though. My mom never bought video games for me. You know, I think even to this day, she still thinks that video games rot children's minds. It was always my dad that had to buy video games. But after a very intelligent and convincing argument, she gave in and brought me a game that would forever change my life. So I got home, I popped the disc into my Xbox, and then I started playing the Battle for Bikini Bottom. Let's start the story as it ultimately sets the stage for everything else in this game. The premise is simple. Plankton is creating a huge army of loyal robots to take over Bikini Bottom. Problem though is that he has a don't obey switch on his machine which the lever is set to. Yep, this is a SpongeBob story. My good China! So the robots begin to run amok unsupervised. SpongeBob and Patrick meanwhile make a wish with the magic wishing shell that they want the robot toys they're playing with to come to life, and when they wake up, they see that robots definitely came, and they were quite a sight, and that's actually pretty much it. The rest of the game basically revolves around SpongeBob and his friends cleaning up Bikini Bottom through various tasks to ultimately defeat all the robots. So okay, you could maybe call the game out for not having a more interesting story, but I have two things to note. First, it's SpongeBob SquarePants, but second, while this isn't the most immersive story out there, it is a great story for a video game structure-wise. This is because the story sets up a purpose as to why you're going to all these locations and accomplishing all these tasks. As a result, it's very flexible in what SpongeBob in the game can do, and that's why you can have locations like the Dutchman's Graveyard and Rock Bottom in the same story and have it make sense. There's no need to explain why you're going to any of these locations because there's robots there. So by default, according to the game's main objective, going to any location with a robot presence is crucial. There are some weird things about the story, sure, like why the f are we collecting golden spatulas? What are these gonna do against the robots? Are we throwing them at the Duplicatotron? Are they secretly the warriors of Robot Pirate Island split into 100 bodies? That's always something I wondered as a kid, but it wasn't necessary at all to answer that, as you could make the same argument for a lot of other platformers that came before this. Like for example, how Banjo-Kazooie seemingly saves the world through the power of jigsaw puzzle pieces. But to summarize, that's why I thought the plot was great for Battle for Bikini Bottom, because it set a logical explanation as to why we were visiting all these locations and completing all these tasks that are loosely connected. Beyond the plot, the writing in this game was also a highlight. This being a SpongeBob game, it would be reasonable to expect a similar type of humor that everyone praises the series for to this very day. I will say that not every joke lands its footing.
I think I have fudge in my pants.
But there are also some iconic lines within this game that to this very day are still quoted and talked about by fans.
Why do you want all that artwork?
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to.
Maybe this day won't be mine. Or the next. Or possibly even the next. Or 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 the next after that. But the one after the next. After the next. After the next. After that. Well, that one after that. Right next to that one. That will be my day.
SpongeBob, how do I get out of here?
Well, that depends. Do you want the booby-trapped or the non-booby-trapped exit?
Non-booby-trapped, please.
Then go that way. Or maybe it was that way.
I would say definitely don't go into this game expecting writing on the level of the first 3 seasons, even though that's when this game first came out, but there are definitely some gems in the package you'll find yourself chuckling at. What I really loved about the game's writing though is how often you run into characters from the show throughout your adventure. You see lots of faces like Larry, Mrs. Puff, Bubble Buddy, and more throughout the various locations. We are missing a couple of main staples that would have been nice to have, but the representation here is a lot more than almost any other SpongeBob game. The game overall takes any opportunity it gets to give a callback to the show, whether it be in its jokes or character appearances, and that's one of the main reasons why this game is a must-have for any semblance of a SpongeBob fan. Sure, this is a typical 3D platformer similar to the likes of Mario and Banjo-Kazooie, but the SpongeBob world obviously has a lot of charm to it, and this game takes full advantage of it. When you look at other SpongeBob games that came before and after this one, it's crystal clear that Heavy Iron Studios did everything they could to really make the player feel like they were fighting side by side with SpongeBob and his friends in Bikini Bottom, and I personally think of this as one of the game's greatest accomplishments. The narrative is also elevated by the game's overall presentation. This game being an early 2000s title, the graphics might not necessarily hold up as well as they could, but that's never bothered me. The reason for that is because SpongeBob is first and foremost a cartoon. It's supposed to have these wacky looking characters and environments that help to illustrate what Bikini Bottom is. And as a kid and all the way up to now, I felt that Heavy Iron Studios did a wonderful job at translating the cartoon over to a 3D video game world. The character models and environments may not be the most detailed in the world even back then, but they all remain extremely faithful to their cartoon counterparts. You'll have those people here and there who will drag the game's graphics just because they don't think the characters work in 3D, but that's a pretty dumb argument in my opinion. Bikini Bottom looks fine in a 3D world, and more recent iterations of the series only prove that. I will say though, even when this game had first come out, there are some areas here and there that I felt could have been spruced up. And by that I mean Kelp Forest. Yeah guys, sorry, I can't give the game a complete pass on its graphics due to the pure existence of this level's lighting. Kelp Forest is one of the worst examples of lighting in a game I'd seen throughout my years as a hardcore gamer. The level is just extremely dark and lacks any real contrast in the environment. I actually would have to manually increase the brightness on my television just to get through this level at times, and that should never be a thing in video games. It's one thing to do it for a whole game, but to do it for just one level when literally every other level is fine in this aspect is just a weird choice, honestly. All they really had to do was just make the colors contrast a bit more, or even place the forest in the daylight, which is how it's represented on the show actually. The Dutchman's Graveyard for instance is also a dark and grimy level, but the green goo glows just enough to bring some contrast to the level. That's how you handle lighting with a darker aesthetic. Rock Bottom would have probably had the same issue as Kelp Forest, but making the buildings baby blue helped to increase the contrast in those levels, so that's another example of how they could have gone about designing Kelp Forest. But here's the positive thing. Kelp Forest is literally the only location I can genuinely criticize, because I absolutely adore how everything else in this game looks. It's strange because I felt all the levels were faithful to the show, but at the same time also took some creative liberties to make the environments better suited for a video game. Take Jellyfish Fields for instance. In the original show, all we ever have of this iconic location is it being this valley with lots and lots of green grass, with an occasional rock structure here and there. In Battle for Bikini Bottom, they definitely fill the level to the brim with grass, but they also incorporate tons of rock structures as well, along with goo and all sorts of other forms of underwater wildlife, such as the majestic toilet paper. And now we went from a field to actual mountains and valleys. This is the main reason why I love the locations in this game so much. They all did an amazing job at taking the core locations aesthetics from the show, but then opening them up to enormous heights for the sake of a platformer. This game made the show's locations come to life without compromising their core identities, and that is truly the greatest appeal about Battle for Bikini Bottom's graphics. I have to say my favorite level visual-wise in the whole game would probably be Spongebob's Dream. It's by far the most unique one here, as it creates dreams for all the core characters that we get to traverse through. It's the most abstract looking of all the levels in the game, and I adored traveling through a booby-trapped Texas-themed slide and navigating sharps and flats under a bunch of mediocre paintings. It makes me wish that this was the direction Creature from the Krusty Krab went in, opinion, as I think there's a ton of potential in exploring bigger and more expansive dream worlds of all these characters, but that's for another video. But another form of the presentation that we have to mention is the music. And you know what? I'm just gonna let the music do the talking here. Wow, just wow. It took every ounce of my gamer body not to post every single track in this damn game. The music to me is one of the most iconic parts of this game. It definitely has a Spongebob tone to all the tracks, but at the same time manages to be one of the most diverse soundtracks I've ever heard in video games. Each track perfectly suits the environment that it corresponds to and aids greatly in bringing Bikini Bottom to life. The organic sounds of tracks like Bikini Bottom and Jellyfish Fields help to establish SpongeBob's core identity from the show, but then tracks like the Robot Theme and Chum Bucket Lab bring in the scenario this game tackles and represents the invasion of the robots in a once peaceful town. These tracks in particular sound like nothing on the show. It's gotten to the point where I saw out the soundtrack, downloaded it, and have basically listened to it daily since Rehydrated was announced. Music isn't the only department of sound I need to touch on though. We've come to the point where I must talk about the voice acting. Pretty much all the main cast returns for this game and they do an amazing job at voicing their characters in this game to absolutely no one's surprise. It was such a crucial step to make sure you got the actual voice actors from the show if you wanted players to truly be immersed in Bikini Bottom while playing this game, so I am very happy that they did that.
That's just wrong!
Okay, I know what you're thinking. RidersDX, what about that 62-cent Mr. Krabs that we got? Well, yes. Mr. Krabs unfortunately did not get his original voice actor. It's been rumored for years that it was a money issue above all else, and I will refrain from commenting on how ironic that is. But here's an unpopular opinion. I don't mind Mr. Krabs' voice actor at all. In fact, I actually think he offers a good performance here. Maybe it's because when I was a kid, it actually took me a while to realize that this wasn't an actual Mr. Krabs. But once I had, I'd already gotten so used to his voice that I honestly didn't give a f. In my honest opinion, this voice actor was still able to nail Mr. Krabs' personality and sound through his portrayal, albeit a few moments here and there. So overall, I was pretty satisfied with how they handled Mr. Krabs. Obviously, it would have been great having Clancy Brown on board, but it never traumatized me like some people claim it did to them. As for the other voice actor change though, he literally sounds like asthma. So I think I spent longer than Patrick takes building anything, avoiding a topic that is obviously integral to BFBB's quality, and that is the gameplay. Battle for Bikini Bottom is a 3D collectathon platformer. It takes heavy inspiration from games such as Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie in placing these characters in wide open worlds with various objects to collect and robots to attack, along with a wide variety of platforming challenges. The game may not be revolutionary or unique in terms of its approach, but I think the game is extremely successful in adopting the formula to the SpongeBob world. There are 3 playable characters in the game, each with their own specific movesets that are true to their character. SpongeBob has moves that are all bubble based. He has a basic spin attack with his bubble wand, is able to propel into enemies with a bubble Viking helmet, bowl bubbles as projectiles towards enemies, and can even guide a bubble shaped missile across a distance. Plus, he can get on some hooks and play hooky. Patrick meanwhile attacks with his stomach and is able to grow grow fruit, and other objects and enemies around various locations for specific platforming challenges, and Sandy can glide in the air with a lasso. Okay, maybe this isn't that accurate, but it's very badass. All three characters control great and are a blast to traverse throughout the game's various environments, but Sandy by far has to be the most fun to play. There's a great sense of freedom you get from being able to traverse across large distances to get to your desired location as long as a weird ass Texas symbol is floating around there. It's almost like Heavy Iron Studios wanted to make a Spider-Man game, but since they didn't have the license, they decided to put it in the weirdest of places, which I have no qualms about. In terms of levels, while they are largely linear and requiring you to go in a certain direction to progress, they're laid out in an open format with various opportunities to go off the main path to find various objects and secrets, and this in my opinion is a great balance of both aspects, as the game will typically be clear enough in terms of where you need to be going, but it also tempts you to explore various locations off the main beaten path with snippets of a sock, shiny objects, and switches that can unlock hidden secrets. For instance, as a kid I thought downtown Bikini Bottom was a largely straightforward level as I went from the streets to the rooftops, but a month into my playthrough of the game I decided to go a little more to the left at this section, and I realized there was a whole other part of this level that takes place in the Sea Needle. My mind was blown seeing this as a kid, as I always wondered where those missing wheels, socks, and spatulas were that I never seemed to be able to find in the level. My favorite layout though would actually have to be the second to last section of Jellyfish Fields, Jellyfish Lake. It's actually one of the areas where I'd say the direction you need to go is not as clear, but the way you traverse the environment is by climbing to the very top of the mountain. Now what's funny about this section is that if at any point you fall down, you actually land in the previous section you were in, rather than having Hans take you and put you back at a checkpoint. This may sound like a frustrating design choice, but to me I actually loved that even as a kid, and the reason for that is because it showed me just how big this game was. When I reached the top of the mountain and looked out in the distance at everything I traversed, I felt like this grand explorer who had just reached the climactic point of his journey. It was so rewarding and just wowed me as a kid, absorbing the scope of this game's levels. Plus, on my way up, there were multiple deviations in the path I could take to find hidden collectibles and secrets which I'd spend hours exploring. Now, despite all this, I wouldn't actually consider Jellyfish Fields my favorite level. My favorite level has always been a weird choice. While I love the nostalgia surplus of those green fields, the horror-infused thrills of Rock Bottom, or even the abstract psychedelic sights of the Bikini Bottom dream world, my favorite level throughout the entirety of Battle for Bikini Bottom has to be Sand Mountain. And the reason is largely this.
Maybe we didn't sing it right.
That's right, cleverly placed line from the show. Extreme is the very definition of Sand Mountain. I guess now would be a good time to talk about some of the deviations from the main gameplay that you experience here, namely the sliding sections. The sliding is probably one of my favorite distractions from the main gameplay in a video game that I've ever experienced. It's always tricky incorporating a new gameplay style into a game where it isn't supposed to be the main style. Should the gameplay stay true to the game's main style? Should it be different and make the experience more diverse? Should a video game even be diverse in this sense? So many video games that have incorporated multiple gameplay styles get a lot of flack for trying to add too much that distracts from the main attraction. This is why I think the sliding portions are the perfect way to incorporate a side gameplay style. First of all, it's fun. Really fun actually. The controls feel so smooth as you're sliding down the terrain no matter the level, and the speed you get from the deviation makes the gameplay feel so exciting and filled to the brim with adrenaline. They're so perfect because they're simple and also typically short segments so they don't overstay their welcome. Except that slide time challenge we will most certainly, definitely, positively, absolutely to the brim will not speak of in any shape or form. But I really want to make this point because these sections are so brief yet satisfying, it never drags on and makes you wish you could go back to the main gameplay you bought that title for. There are some Spongebob games afterwards that did this way worse and forced their alternate gameplay styles onto your experience and dragged out the adventure. Examples include driving levels in the movie game or about half a creature from the Krusty Krab. The sliding sections are so much fun and they are quantified perfectly to where they establish a presence, but they do not detract from the main attraction, which is perfect. The sliding sections are so much fun. Sand Mountain itself is a really unique level structure-wise in the game. It serves as a great change of pace from the adventuring format of all the other levels that came beforehand. I wouldn't want more levels like it, as I see it as a perfect deviation from the main game. Kinda like the Princess Peach levels in the original Paper Mario. After a long duration of traversing through a haunted castle for instance, you switch over to controlling Peach for a brief moment as you see her perspective of how things are going while being trapped by Bowser. These sections were brief but added a lot more narrative to the game's overall plot. The sliding sections serve a similar purpose but more from a gameplay perspective. They help to keep the gameplay fresh and exciting. Now, I will say, there are definitely some issues with the gameplay, much like any other platformer. One of the biggest detractors for BFBB is the camera. The basic gist is to not look up or down because the camera just refuses to be of use at that point. Horizontal movement works well enough though. The Spongebob mechanic is poorly controlled as whenever you need to use it, half of the battle is in trying to direct the ball in the direction you want it to go. Thankfully, these sections are far and few in between. One last critique I'll bring up is that some parts of the game also present a significant challenge, with a few spatulas almost seemingly relying on luck. Actually, you know what though? I'm going to counter that argument through explaining one of my favorite level design philosophies of any video game that this game does have. One of the most genius aspects of BFBB's design is how you don't need to go through every single spatula to get to the ending of the game. There are 100 total spatulas in the game, but only 75 are actually needed to enter the chum bucket and defeat the final boss. This means you are not subjected to being forced to slave through the rolling ball challenge or race down the slide we do not speak of. You will be fine if you want to skip a particularly challenging aspect of the game as long as you can finish 75% of it, which is a very fair requirement for the final boss. But for completionists, if you do 100% it, you get a small surprise to commemorate your efforts, but it's nothing that would make people that didn't get to that point feel like they were missing out on a huge aspect of the game. I honestly can't praise this structure enough as it gives players a lot of leg room to craft their experience in the way that they like. It's to the point where you could skip an entire world and still be able to battle Robot Spongebob. I really wish more games would adopt this method, giving people a relatively balanced experience in getting to the end, but also giving people that want the option to tackle more challenging missions. Just to give some examples of how other games really failed to do this, one of my favorite games growing up was Sonic Heroes. The gameplay was fun, engaging, and addictive. However, the game makes a pretty big misstep in essentially requiring you to complete the game 4 different times with the different teams to access the final boss. I look back on this game with fond memories, but realized that even back then I hated this clear effort to pad the game out. The Spongebob movie game is another example of this mentality, requiring you to replay numerous sliding and driving levels, in particular to grind for tokens to progress through the game. It's tough to please all audiences with any video game, but I think BFBB came really close with this design mentality. If you wanted a more breezy playthrough to get to the final boss, you can do so with ease, but if you want to complete the game entirely, you can do that as well. I also wanted to touch upon the bosses of the game and just relish how badass they are. I mean, just look at these guys. They are the faces of ferocious beasts in the corporate world. So with the bosses looking as cool and coral as they do, are they fun to battle against? Well, yes and no. I love the choices for the bosses. All the villains you fight are overall excellent candidates for this game, including the original character Prawn. However, all the bosses use the typical avoid the boss and then attack formula. It's fine if this is the typical structure that they want to utilize, but some bosses definitely drag on for way longer than they should. The number one culprit for me is the Flying Dutchman. I mean, come on man, don't your eyes ever burn from using those lasers so much? But then you've got bosses like the Robot Spongebob, which feel intense and fast paced, definitely standing the test of time as a highlight moment of the game. The Alpha Bikini Bomb has a ton to offer with its gameplay, and I can confidently say that its mechanics have aged like fine wine. So we've definitely traversed through all the trenches we could possibly think of to review this game. It just feels like this game checks off all the boxes to churn out a really solid 3D platformer. But here's the thing, tons of games that came out beforehand arguably did this even better. So while BFBB is a solid platformer, it certainly isn't a genre-defining game like some of its popular contemporaries are. So my question I want to pose now is, what makes BFBB so special? Why was this game the one that stood the test of time compared to so many other licensed games that came out in the same era? Alpha Bikini Bottom set this precedent for me as a kid that SpongeBob was not just a great television show, that he was also a great video game franchise, and also just a great inspiration. When I look at SpongeBob, I see the literal definition of pure joy and happiness. SpongeBob has always had this huge impact on my life, even when I thought I was growing out of him as a teenager. SpongeBob always represented the safe haven for me, where the yellow guy would always have a way to bring a smile to my face whenever he came on. SpongeBob showed me time and time again that in the face of constant negativity and adversity everywhere you went, there was still happiness that you could find if you opened your eyes. Happiness that you could tap into. Joy that was there in even the most mundane tasks, such as being woken up by your alarm clock. Like, who smiles to being woken up by an alarm clock? Stuff like that is what makes SpongeBob such an inspirational figure in my mind, and this game was such a huge part of my childhood because it really made me feel like I was a duplicatotron of sunshine and positivity. Oh my god, did I really write that? So the game already had me hooked as a kid simply because it dared to take someone who was essentially an idol to me and put him in this grand adventure. When I got back from Bikini Bottom, I was still relatively new to video games as I had just declared myself a part of my first video game fandom, the Sonic franchise. I joined message boards and everything to show my appreciation for the series. I never did this for SpongeBob for some reason. He was always just on a TV show that my eyes were glued to whenever it came on. But then BFBB came and I became invested in SpongeBob in a way that I hadn't beforehand. Television is great and it'll be a part of pretty much every kid's life from here on out, but video games were always different to me because it not only contained a narrative I could get from a TV show, but it also helped immerse myself in an adventure, an experience. Being a 10-year-old who still saw so much mystery and adventure in the world waiting to be discovered, video games were the perfect way to help me get a taste of what that could be. At least that's what I thought as a kid. You just have to invest a lot more in playing a video game compared to just sitting idly on a couch watching a show. You have to take control, help the characters progress through the game. So thinking back on it, this was a very interesting thing to experience as a kid, to take control of characters I've only ever enjoyed passively. And here lies a huge reason why this game had me hooked as a kid. Heavy Iron Studios did everything they could to really draw you into the world of SpongeBob. Because of the game's overall package in terms of scope, look, sound, and writing, it truly felt like I had stepped into my favorite TV show. It was quite different from playing Sonic Heroes for the first time, where I was discovering a whole world I'd never seen before. I'd already seen and known who SpongeBob is, and where he goes to work, where he goes jellyfishing, where he hangs out with his friends, all that stuff. But something about stepping into the world of BFBB and actually experiencing all that firsthand was so magical to me. Way too often we see licensed games that just use the franchise they are borrowing as a mere mask to cover a generic 3D platformer. But BFBB dared to be different, incorporating countless amounts of ideas from the franchise to create a truly amazing experience that respects its source material to a T. Sliding down Sand Mountain on SpongeBob's tongue was a cathartic masterpiece. Battling Robot SpongeBob after everything we'd gone through was the equivalent to a cinematic climax of the best Marvel movies. Seeing Mrs. Puff be a jittery mess throughout the whole game just brought so much joy to my eyes. I love all the small and big things about this game, and a lot of that is probably due to both my love for the franchise and also nostalgia from playing the game for countless hours as a kid. So I know what you're probably thinking. I love this game just because it's nostalgic, and yes, that's definitely a reason for my undeniable love for this game. But my rebuttal for that nostalgia argument is, if the game wasn't good, would I have enjoyed it as much as I did? Why else did I complete over 100 playthroughs of the game up to this very moment? I understand that nostalgia is a huge reason as to why I hold this game so close, but nostalgia can only take a game so far. There's games that I also played tons of as a kid that I no longer love as much, so why did BFBB stand the test of time? It's because of all the smallest and biggest details the game has to offer in recreating that iconic SpongeBob experience in video game form. I don't particularly have many specific memories when it comes to playing this game. I just remember playing it constantly and loving it so much that I wanted to buy every SpongeBob game that came afterwards. More on those in future videos. But I do have one extremely clear memory of this game that I will probably never forget, especially after covering Rehydrated. There was one moment in my grade school life where I had come down with serious illness that kept me out of school for almost a month. I don't remember what it was I had exactly, I just remember constantly feeling nauseous and throwing up. One day during this illness, my mom had gone to the store to buy me some medicine, and with her gone, I snuck downstairs and turned on my Xbox. My mom was really strict about me not playing video games when I was in bed, sick, but something that day made me really want to play some Battle for Bikini Bottom. I was in SpongeBob's dream and I had just reached Sandy's portion of the level. I don't remember if this was the first time I had encountered this section, but I do remember hooking myself onto that Texas symbol and beginning yet another adrenaline-inducing race to the finish. And as I kept playing, I eventually realized that I had stopped feeling nauseous. It was as if I had not been staying at home for nearly a month, sick out of my mind. I felt that I had traveled outside my body in a way, and entered the world of BFBB. And it was in this moment that I realized just how special this game was. I realized that this game had the power to make me lose myself in a world that wasn't even real. It was one of those games I could play to tune out everything going on around me and just fully immerse myself in an experience starring my favorite television characters. I felt like I was Sandy at this moment. I was that badass squirrel sliding down a ginormous challenge in my own dream because I was just that cool. It felt so perfect in that moment, and I didn't want to stop. But when my mom began to unlock the door, I definitely tried to stop, but that's a story that's not very interesting. But I think that is the most confusing but unapologetic way I can describe why I love this game, and why I will continue to love it until the end of time. So Battle for Bikini Bottom may not be seen as a masterpiece by most people. but it's my masterpiece. The way that this game impacted me is honestly the reason why I decided to focus so much on SpongeBob games on this channel. I guess my pie in the sky dream would be for SpongeBob to churn out video games as good as like Super Mario Odyssey, A Hat in Time, or even the new Crash Bandicoot game coming out later this year. The world and characters of this franchise are just filled to the brim with potential, and so many SpongeBob games beyond BFBB show that. From the abstract world to Creature from the Krusty Krab, the inviting animations of Truth for Square, and of course the solid platforming of BFBB, SpongeBob has what it takes to make a name for himself in the video game industry. There's no reason why such a successful franchise with such a great world for you to interact with can't have great video games like those other franchises. Just because it's a licensed franchise doesn't mean you have to have poor or mediocre games. This game proved that there's a lot of value in taking your time on games and making them great, making them amazing, and there's a lot of value in terms of that because the fans will carry the game throughout the years. That's why this game has survived so long. That's why there's a whole gigantic speedrunning community behind it. That's why there's people like me that can make really successful YouTube channels off of this game because this game created that. And so why not give us more amazing games like this? I know it's not realistic, you know, knowing Nickelodeon and all that, and hoping and praying for like another game as great as this one, but a guy can dream. And honestly, the only way we'll probably ever get any like that is if we keep dreaming, is if we keep bugging these developers, these publishers, these companies that we want a fantastic SpongeBob game. We don't just want any SpongeBob game. We won't just buy any SpongeBob game. We want amazing SpongeBob games. I will say though, we might be getting close to that in the near future. Tune in next time as I dive into a more rehydrated ocean.
Too bad that didn't kill me.
A special shout out to Team Ride with Sonic Gamer, Glitched Outfin, New Gamer Hub, Shara Rainfall, Abraham Muner, Andrew Coughlin, Nas Muner, The Nerd Corner, and Rudy Star Pony. These are my patrons / YouTube members. If you'd like to become a patron or YouTube member, get access to a whole bunch of different perks, including seeing reviews like this early, then please check out the links in the description box below. But okay, this is Riders, riding out.